I didn't hear the depot before I smelled it. Diesel hung in the air like wet pennies and bad decisions, soaked into every brick of Depot 14, so deep the place would probably reek for a century after they tore it down. The sodium lights out over the yard hummed, that cheap yellow hum that makes everything look like an old bruise. The wash rack chattered in its sleep. Gulls commute in from the river like everybody else, and one of them screamed from the roof over the bays. I clocked in 2 minutes early, just to spite the sticky note waiting on the glass of the starter's office. Late again equals right up. Last warning. Same block letters I'd been seeing for 11 years. Different break rooms, different bosses, different versions of me. The ATU Local 119 flyer, attendance is safety, curled underneath it, chewed at the corner like somebody had been stress-eating paper. Evening, Morales. The night security guy didn't look up from his phone. Yeah, it came out like a cough. Cold air bit my molars. I'd chewed 2 nicotine lozenges on the drive. Didn't help. Inside starters, the heater wheezed warm dust and simple green. The desk had a coffee ring from before I was born. My paddle, block sheets rubber banded together, sat waiting with my name sharpied across the top. Something extra clipped under the band. A white plastic card the size of a cheap luggage tag. Rule card, Depot 14. No agency logo, no signature. The laminate bubbled along one edge, like whoever made it had used an iron at home. I checked the haul, then slid the card free. 6 lines, capital letters, plain as a hammer. Rule number 1. If PA calls Route 19, Riverline, lift dispatch handset, and say Depot 14 acknowledges. Mark block deadhead. Rule number 2. If MDT displays PAX pending, swipe badge on farebox, press void comp, tape receipt to windshield. Rule number 3. Code 186 during count equals short count. Seal bag, log as 186. Rule number 4. 2:06 a.m. if bus 00 kneels, doors open, walk past, clip void comp receipt under wiper. Rule number 5. Powered down bus with rider, ask for transfer. If no date, Riverline, pull knife switch and exit. Rule number 6. Yard lights blink 5-3, badge once under camera dome and stay put. At the bottom someone had added with a ballpoint, neat but angry, no exceptions. I looked for a joke. A smiley face, you got hazed, in smaller ink. Nothing. I flipped it over, blank. Real funny, I told the empty office. The blower in the heater shifted into a higher gear, spit grit into the vent. My probation clock burned in my head. Day 23 of 90, 2 write-ups, and Grandma loses the plan. She'd coughed for a full minute this morning, the long, wet kind that ends quiet. I'd stood in the kitchen holding a glass of water, wanting to pour it out because my hand was shaking. I wasn't losing this job over somebody's prank card. I tucked the rules under the rubber band anyway. You don't throw away a laminated card at a depot. Lamination means someone loved it enough to protect it. I did the walk I always do before the night really starts, through the bay doors, past the wash rack, along the fence line where the wind drags a sour metallic stink off the scrapyard next door. The asphalt had that winter damp that never dries, slick as the skin on cold gravy. My work boots found the low spots automatically. I could have done this blind. Buses sat in their rows, windows fogged from the day crew's breath, a city's worth of complaints. Grocery bags, kids' shoes still ghosted on the glass. Every coach looks meaner with the power off. Black rectangles for eyes, mouth clamped shut. A supervisor's Crown Vic ticked as it cooled. Engine smell sweet and poisonous. Somewhere a relay clicked. Once, like a small animal dying. The PA speaker over the yard squealed. Feedback, that thin steel tin noise that makes your fillings itch. I stopped, stared at it like it had said my name. The speaker was a crusty rectangle, bolted to the brick beside the bay, scarred where someone had tried to pry it off once and gave up. We rarely use the PA at night. Dispatch pings the tablets. The PAs for daytime chaos, school specials, weather alerts, the starter yelling because a driver went to the wrong lane again. It squealed again, then hissed. Old radios have a particular hiss, not like rain, not like frying. This was the hiss of dust getting hot on a filament, of a transformer thinking about quitting, but deciding to punish you first. Then the voice. Not really a voice, just the shape of one inside the hiss. The words came out flat and perfect, like a needle dropping into the groove. Route 19, Riverline. I didn't move. Heat landed under my sternum. Spread. A slow pour of something heavy. The card in my back pocket just got heavier. Riverline isn't in our paddles. Not since 2011. When the east span dropped like a bad promise at 2:06 a.m., 12 dead. Somebody always leaves flowers on the cyclone fence near the memorial plaque. The bouquet turns black by February, becomes part of the fence. Must be maintenance screwing with the board, I said, but nobody was around to hear me lie. The PA stayed open. His stronger now, like the system wanted to say it again, but was waiting to see what I did. The rule card lived hot against the spine of my wallet. My hands moved before my head caught up. I went back into starters and grabbed the old, nicotine-brown dispatch handset off the cradle. The coiled cord left a little smear of black on my palm. The phrase on the rule card buzzed in my teeth. I didn't want to say it. Saying things makes them happen. Depot 14 acknowledges, I said. My voice felt 2 sizes too small in that room, but the PA heard me fine. Mark blocked deadhead. The hiss cut off like someone pinched a hose. The silence after hurt worse than the noise. The heater hiccuped, then settled. The clock on the wall said 11:03. Somewhere in the building, a vending machine decided to whirl its coil for no reason. Thunk, a honey bun against glass. I could taste the sugar on my tongue just from hearing it. I waited for laughter. For Maritza from day shift to pop her head in and film me for her stories. Dante Talks to Ghosts Part 1. I waited for the starter to text LMAO. Nothing. The building breathed, old building breath, warm air smelling of mop bucket, and asbestos hiding its age with fresh paint. Cute, I said to the rule card when I went back and slid it under the paddle band again. You win. I started my rounds like always, checked the wash rack chemicals, chlorine sharp enough to sting the roof of your mouth, degreaser that dries your knuckles white. Check the fuel island. Wipe up the spill where someone got sloppy and a rainbow puddle had settled under the nozzle. The rag came away slick and cold, and stayed cold in my hand even after I wrung it out. I hung it by the boiler, watched a curl of steam catch the sodium light. The fixture's hum rose and fell as the ballast warmed up. The cold rides your bones different out here at night. It's not just temperature, it's emptiness with weight. The buses are heavy, but the human part's gone. So the feeling sinks to the concrete like a low fog, then waits for a shape to fill it. When a gull's wings clap above the bays, you think it's somebody pulling a tarp. For 1 second, and your heart goes squirrel in its cage. I was halfway down lane C when I felt it. The tiny mercurial prickle at the back of the neck. The feeling that says somebody just opened an app with your name in it. There's no science to it, but you know it the same way you know when someone you love starts a text with hey and not hey. At first, nothing. Then a single coach, 432. It blinked its interior courtesy light and died again. A power hiccup. Happens when batteries are old, or a driver killed the switch wrong. I walked up the aisle with the careful feet you use in a church you don't believe in. Breath fogging a thin film on the glass. The metal stanchions were colder than the air, the way basement pipes are colder, the way morgue slabs are colder. I gripped one anyway, because my legs had the shaky thing. The smell inside wasn't quite right. Too clean, like a room that hasn't had enough people in it. The MDT was dark. I could see my face in it, pale and egg-shaped, older than I had any right to look under this light. A scrap of fast food napkin skated on the floor like a ghost mouse. I tapped the screen with one finger. Nothing. I reached toward the breaker panel to make sure the bus was really dead. and the MDT blinked on by itself. Some of these old girls sip from the yard chargers even with the knife switch down. Shore power keeps the brains on a drip. The glass went gray, then white, then black letters punched through from the back end. PAX pending. No chime, no boot logo, just the two words, fat and official. Then the glow shifted to a graphic I'd never seen. Farebox symbol, little arrows pointing toward it. Then a block of text that vanished before I read the last line. Come on, I said. But to the bus or myself, I don't know. I backed out, hip bumping a seat hard enough to make the whole row rattle. The rattle carried down the bus, came back at me like the train game we did when we were kids. Tap one end of a fence, count the post clicks. I stood in the open doors, inhaled winter. Diesel floated under it like a low chord, and under that, a thread of wet limestone. Rule number 2 returned like a slap. If MDT displays PAX pending, swipe badge on farebox, press void comp, tape receipt to windshield. My badge lay flat against my chest, on its retractable reel. Cold as a coin, the farebox crouched by the doors, the tugboat-shaped Genfare unit we all cuss under our breath. In the day, it eats bills and spits transfers. At night, it sits inert. Little green power dot off like a dead firefly. It wasn't off now. The dot pulsed slow as a sleeping thing. I hadn't powered the bus. Nobody had. Okay, I said, because talking out loud turns a nightmare into a task. Okay, we're doing the rule. My hand shook exactly once as I swiped the badge over the reader. Old plastic squeaked under newer plastic. The farebox screen woke the way old dogs wake. A jerk, a blink, then a groan all through its casing. The menu wasn't the normal one, a green field with a single button, void comp. No soft teas, no back arrow, no menu tree. Pick the only thing the universe is offering you, Morales. I pressed. The farebox spit heat, a stubby thermal receipt sliding out. Dark letters already bleeding where the ribbon was going. The smell of new ink cut into the diesel, a chemical sweetness that sat at the back of my tongue. I tore the slip. My thumb came away gray. Comp charge, sat in the middle in capitals. No time, no date. Tape. The rule said tape. And for once in my life, I had tape. I keep a roll of blue painters in my pocket because electrical leaves gum, and on these old windshields any gum turns to black mud. I climbed the step, wiped a patch of glass with my sleeve, heard the cloth rasp. I taped the slip dead center at eye level, the way inspectors hate, and patted it like a bandage. The bus sighed, not air pressure, not hydraulics. Something out of the body of it eased. That's ridiculous, I know, but I felt it from the floor up, like the concrete let out a little breath too. Behind me, the PA speaker crackled again, then thought better. Wind walked the yard, combed it with invisible fingers. The sodium lights hummed their old song. I waited there, a long 30 seconds. Felt like being held underwater by someone who loves you. Nothing else happened. I stepped down to the asphalt, and the cold took my knees. My hands were stupid with it. My breath came out in a bigger cloud than before. The MDT screen inside the bus threw its small square of light into the dark. From where I stood, I could just make out the words, PAX pending. Flicker, hesitate, then resolve into a new line I couldn't read at this angle. The letters were white and unfriendly. I climbed back up, just enough to see. The old display had returned. The black letters looked thicker now, like they'd been bolded by a hand. PAX pending, and under it smaller, like a whisper written down because you couldn't say it out loud. Riverline. The word sat there like it had always been waiting for me. Riverline. Cold went down and stayed. My breath filmed the MDT, vein sideways, cleared, then mirrored my face back, eyes too dry. A weak shave pretending to be a beard. The rule card burned a neat rectangle through my wallet into my spine. By the book, I told the bus in the sodium light. We do it by the book. I hooked a boot on the rubber edge of the step and reached for the farebox. The Genfare crouched there, its green eye breathing slow off the yard's trickle power. I pulled the lanyard. The reel whispered out. Badge plastic bit my fingertip. I held the badge to the reader. A click I could feel in my teeth. No city logo, no menu tree. Just one button on municipal green. Void. I pressed. The thermal head woke with a tired scrape. A short receipt slid out hot. The smell of ink and plasticized paper cutting through diesel and bleach. Comped ride. No charge. No date, no time, no coach. Tape. The rule said tape. I tore blue painters with my teeth, wiped a dry circle on the inside of the glass, stuck the slip center high. Heat from the paper made a ring of fog bloom and die around my thumb. Under my boots, a little settle ran through the bus. Not air, not hydraulics. Weight changing its mind. The MDT dipped to gray like held breath and came back. Packs pending. Then, faint as skin under a lamp, comp override accepted. My shoulders dropped a notch. There you go, I said. Paperwork. I stepped down. The top layer of the black puddle under the step had skinned over, cracked under my heel with a glassy chirp. Diesel bled up. Antifreeze sweetened the edge from the wash rack's lazy leak. The sodium wash made the lane look longer than it is. I should have moved on. Fluids, fence, wash. I watched the MDT instead. Packs pending held. No beep. No little animated bus creeping stop to stop. Just that line. Patient. Something clicked farther back in the cabin. Not a bang, more like a coin glancing off rubber and finding a seam. My head snapped. A nerve in my neck complained. Nothing moved. The aisle held its yellow bars of light. Seat fabric kept the cold like it was doing somebody a favor. The floor's black grit glinted. You're jumpy, I told myself. You're a grown man afraid of a bus. I laid my palm on the fare box like you calm a dog. Heat still seeped off the fresh receipt. The box purred. My badge reel reeled home. I could feel my heart under it. Big, stupid, doing its job. Down the lane, a compressor bled on another coach. The sound traveled wrong, made my shoulders go up anyway. I took 2 steps back into the yard. The receipt looked like a patch over a wound in the glass. Pride flared, stupid and fast. The kind you get when a thing finally works the way the SOP says it should. All right, I said. Onward. The PA contacts kissed and let go, 2 pennies then quiet. I pretended not to hear. I swung around the nose of 432 to check sidewalls out of habit. Salt halo, tired decal, cold rubber. I tapped the front cap once, the way an old driver taught me. A superstition that costs nothing. The fare box printer inside ticked. Thought better of it. Went still. The wind shifted. River came on it, wet stone, iron, a taste that rides your tongue. My teeth ached like I'd been chewing ice. I lifted my collar and swore at the tag that always scratches. I did the next coach. And the next. Knocked slush off a step so a morning guy wouldn't eat concrete. Tightened a mirror clamp, breath fogging the wrench. Stood in the rack doorway long enough for humidity to stick my lashes. Then let the air snap me dry. The night tried to be normal again. Back at 432, the MDT still glowed. The windshield looked wrong with that paper dead center. Wrong like a photo where someone blinked. The blue tape corners flagged in the light. I touched one. Lifted a millimeter. Pressed it down. Leave the bandage on. Something the size of a 3x5 lay in the stepwell by the fare box. Not paper, too stiff. It had glued itself to the anti-slip. I pried it up with a nail. Transfer stock, our make, the weave you can ID by feel after a week. This one was slick with cold like it had lived under ice. I tipped it into the sodium and the ink woke. Transfer good until, blank, no punch, no timestamp. Route, Riverline in a clean old font our printers don't know. I ran my thumb across, nothing smeared. Our ink always comes off if you breathe on it. This looked pressed in. A cold line crept along my wrist where nothing wet touched me, nerves lying to me over diesel, ozone, old paper. I waited it out. Rule number 2 ticked like a metronome. MDT, swipe, void, comp, tape. I had done the dance. The box had printed the stub like a good machine. This transfer was the opposite of a comp. It was a promise. I wanted to pitch it into the dark. Instead, I slid it behind my cigarettes. It made a damp rectangle against my ribs. "Enough," I said. The word hit the yard and died short. The heater and starters kicked hard enough to make the gull on the roof complain. I walked back to the office because writing it down is how you keep your life. The room smelled like warm dust, cheap coffee, pine freshener jammed on a heater cage. Fingers thawed and hurt like someone unscrewing a cap. I pulled the incident notebook, the one for low air, prosthetic leg on seat, lipstick number on windshield. Pen plastic tasted like school. Pages crackled. 11:19 p.m. Unit 432. MDT displayed PAX pending. Followed rule number 2. Void/compete. Receipt taped inside windshield. Transfer stock found, no date. Route field, Riverline. Smelled water. Leave in, I crossed it out. Wrote it again smaller, signed. Let the ink smear on purpose so a human hand would show. Back outside, the hum felt louder. The dark between buses wasn't dark, it was distance. You learn the difference. I didn't hear her stand so much as notice where the cold pulled different. The way fabric remembers heat, a second longer in the angle of legs. 15 feet back past the wheel hump, air caught on a shape. I didn't run. You don't run in a depot. You break a knee and the union sends flowers. Boots on ribbed steps, rails taking my weight. The cabin was breath cold. My exhale hung heavy, slid toward the rear, and hooked on nothing that air should be. She wore a city winter coat, but not ours. Not this decade's. 2 thin chevrons of tape instead of 1 fat bar. Wet hair stuck to the hood. Her head was turned like she'd been watching the window and decided not to anymore. Her hand held a square I knew by weight. Transfer stock. The blue drank light. My mouth had nothing. The receipt on the glass made a small noise as it cooled. "Ma'am," I managed, hauling my voice down. "No riders after power down." Her head turned a fraction, slow. The transfer had no date. Wrote said Riverline in that wrong neat print. Her thumb moved. The ink didn't. The rule card edge cut my palm through denim. Ask for the transfer. If it's blank or says Riverline, kill the power and walk. "Can I see your transfer?" I asked. My breath slid around something I couldn't see and was gone. She didn't quite look at me. Her chin tipped a half degree, like listening. The hood framed a cheek gone slate with cold. The reflective tape ran 2 thin chevrons, old spec. Water beaded along the edges and held. The square in her hand showed itself without offering. Blank date bar. Route, Riverline in a print too clean for our junk printers. The blue ink drank the sodium and gave nothing back. "Transfer," I said again, and heard the apology in my tone. The one that says I need the rule more than I need to win. I bit my glove off and held out a bare hand. Skin went tight in a second. She turned her wrist just enough. Presentation, not compliance. A bead of water sat on the corner. It trembled with the metal's settle. It didn't fall. Knife switch. The rule said it as clearly as my pocket did. The switch isn't in the cabin. Safety keeps you outside, away from arc and battery gas if something decides to teach you a lesson. On these old coaches, it's a red handle behind the curbside rear panel. I had to put my back to the aisle to go get it. Every nerve in my neck filed a complaint. I went anyway. Cold took my face. My lungs grabbed it. The panel latch had that buried cold tack where your finger sticks a blink before it lets go. Pop, louder than it should be, right up the spine. Behind it, battery bank, cable runs like black tendon, a decade's leaf trash. The red handle sat dull with old grease. "Sorry," I told whoever was collecting apologies tonight. "Card says I do this." I pulled. The handle fought, then gave with a real machine chunk. Inside, relays cascaded. Click, click, a deeper click that always feels like a heart knocking off overtime. Courtesy lights died. The farebox hum unwound and went flat. The receipt on the glass crackled as its heat left. Something metal pinged once and settled. The coach exhaled. Not air. A thin line of ozone cut through diesel. First bolt smell. Hair lifted under my sleeves. That one you feel even if you don't believe in anything. Out here, the yard keeps a trickle on the brains even with the knife down. That's why the Genfare can wink and the MDT can twitch when nobody's home. But the switch isolates the bus from itself. On these, that's enough. Rule said walk away. Not look. Not count. Walk. I shut the panel without latching because my hands had opinions. 1, 2, 3 careful steps along the slick. I turned back because I'm not built right. The MDT was dark. The taped slip looked like a patch over a bad spot. The aisle was yellow-gray and then nothing. The shape that had been in the back wasn't a shape anymore. 3 slow breaths. On the third, my exhale moved into the aisle and didn't hit anything. Good enough. Starter's heat punched my fingers when it found them. Pain bloomed, then settled. I jammed my hands under the hand dryer. It howled, moved air like a tired leaf blower. Paper never cares about your circulation, so I wrote. Unit 432. Rider after power down. Transfer. No date. Route. Riverline. Pulled knife switch. Rider gone. Ozone smell. I underlined knife switch because that's the part a boss can nod at. I left the smell in, small. Lying on paper is worse luck than telling the truth. The office machine woke to a fan whine I could feel in the desk. Audit app came up behind the same threat banner it always wears. Columns, coach, vault count, discrepancy. A live line blinked at the top in school bus yellow like it had been waiting for me. Unit 432, count status short. Error code 186, unclosed tab. Review. More? The rest of my name wrapped into the next cell. I leaned in as if that would change it. It didn't. Code 186 is that firmware hiccup we see. Farebox session resets mid-route. Someone boards into a new tap that never closes. Accounting leaves a sticky. Somebody gets a speech. It doesn't usually blink your name. It's details. I clicked where you shouldn't. The pane coughed up smaller type. Unclosed tap. Carrier of record. Morales D. Murat. Carrier of record. Not yard talk. HR talk. Legal talk. The person the system decides owns the thing. The room changed pressure like a storm 3 blocks over. The heater took itself down a notch. The PA out in the yard thought about speaking and didn't. In the door glass, the yard stretched a little too long like the light had pulled it. I backed out of details, like that could unsay it. The main screen kept my name blinking. Cursor doing its calm hospital pulse. Short. 186 sat neat as a label on a drawer you don't open. Fine, I told the screen. The heater belt slipped and caught. I did the rule. Log whatever you want. The door gasket kissed my shoulder on the way out. The cold laid a hand on the back of my neck. Down lane, a single interior courtesy light on a coach popped and died. Not dramatic, more like a decision undone. Behind me, the dispatch radio, the old one we only touch when the back end dies, brought up a carrier wave thin as a glass set down in the next room. A voice tried to form at the edge of hearing. Harmonics wrong, like water in a pipe. Copy, it said, then swallowed itself. Hot plastic and copper hit my tongue anyway. Lane C pulled my eyes. Above the yard clock, the dome's red LED blinked once and went steady. Wind did laps at ankle height. Noted, I told the night. Back at 432, the door was still where I'd left it, a black mouth. The taped receipt stared like a fake pupil. I took the first 2 steps and stopped. The place she'd been was only fabric with a darker patch that felt dry under my knuckles. The smell, wet limestone, a little bleach, old iron you taste in your teeth, hung and thinned. Thanks for riding, I said into my collar. Because I'm an idiot, and because you thank the thing that could have hurt you, and didn't. The farebox was dark, the MDT dead. The same slick cracked under my heel and wrote thin veins in the puddle skin. In the office, my name still blinked where someone else's should have. Pending passenger hadn't lit yet. That would be later. For now, it was 186, polite as a warning. I sat because standing felt like a commitment. Grit, coffee, sugar, and salt lived under my palms. The heater went quiet. The quiet leaned in. Then the audit line blinked again. Faster this time, like a person trying to catch an eye across a room. Morales D, pending passenger. The cursor pulsed on that line like a hospital blip. Every pulse meant me, but not me. The way your name sounds wrong when a stranger yells it across a lot. No, I told the screen, the room, and the laminate digging my back. Nope. The heater cut, and the kind of silence old civic buildings keep settled in. Electrical residue humming behind the teeth. Dust and stale coffee lived in the air. Through the glass door, the yard held its sodium yellow like a bruise. The corner pole hiccuped once, then began a deliberate pattern. 5 blinks. Pause. 3 blinks. The rule card pressed its letters into my skin. If yard lights blink 5, 3, badge once under the dome and stay put. I stood too fast. The chair chirped on the linoleum. You hold up plastic when something tries to tell you you're not you. That's the reflex. Payroll on a lanyard. Blood with a number. The door let go of its weather strip with a tired kiss. Cold slapped the back of my neck. Diesel sat under it. A sweet antifreeze note drifted from the wash rack where a line had bled all week. Wind moved low across the lanes, petty as loose change. The light ran the code again, exact as a metronome. Okay, I said. We'll do it by the card. The camera dome hangs over the time clock. A plexi bubble that smells faintly of hot ballast when it wakes. I took the slick path slow, boots squeaking the way rubber does on invisible ice. The red LED inside the dome burned steady, patient. Once, I told myself. Only once. I tapped my badge. The reader gave a soft toy bip. The LCD rolled. Morales D, 2347. The thermal spat a thin strip. In. Nonsense, I'd already clocked in, but logic here's a suggestion. Done, I said. The yard light finished its 3. Sweat at my hairline went cold fast. Stay put, the rule said. I set my feet shoulder width, like I was waiting for a foreman. The metal door behind me ticked as it cooled. Somewhere a compressor bled off in 2 beats that sounded like a sick laugh. I breathed through my mouth. The diesel taste had gone metallic. Inside the dome, a relay clicked. The kind of small, dry sound your ear decides to live in once it hears it. The LED flickered off on off, then held steady again. Good, I told plastic, glass, and lungs. We're good. Slash the clock spit a second strip. Same stock, same sigh. It read in again with the same minute. Beneath Morales D. I looked at the printout, at the dome, long enough to burn a red after image into my vision. No, I said, grabbing the clock's edge like I might rip it down and feed it to the boiler. The door behind me rasped. A shadow crossed my boots. He slid out of my peripheral and took my shape with him. Same jacket with the wash brush shine on the left shoulder. Same heel wear on the left boot. He passed close enough I could smell my life, cheap laundry soap. A thread of iodine from a clamp cut earlier. The ghost of cologne I swore off. Hey, I said. The wind folded the word. He didn't look. Hat brim low the way I wear it when my head throbs, but canted wrong, like someone rebuilt it. He walked with the posture I save for jobs I hate and need. The clock chirped again without my badge. 2347 rolled for a 3rd time. The top segment on the 7 didn't light, our depot's broken screen living in the copy. The wall radio, the real dispatch box the city forgets to replace, groaned awake. Carrier wave rose like a held breath. A voice crawled out with the consonants too wet. Copy unreliable at 14, it said, shaping a smile into the word unreliable. Complete pickups. Hot plastic and copper hit the nose. I faced the yard, because looking at myself, not myself, makes a man go soft. Lane C lay in its rectangle. Wind combed the skirts and made a dry whisper. The tall light ran 5-3 again, polite as instruction. Down by the wash, a bus door side open without air. Rubber peeled from metal like it had decided to. The head sign was dead, just a matte panel with a salt grind. But a phantom special hovered in it the way after images do. T, my wrong brim version, didn't hurry. He cut diagonally across the paint, placing his weight in the dry between slick patches like he'd memorized every dip the way I have. Shoulders set forward for ugly wind. He walked past the steaming ribs of the wash toward the bay where the oldest coaches sleep in pairs. Yo, I said, for lack of any other language. It died 3 feet out. My stomach turned slow, the way it does when a pothole finds you. My mouth went paper. I wanted to catch him by the collar and ask which of my bills he planned to pay with me. The rule pressed its stay put into my hip until I could feel the letters. The dome clicked again. I looked up and met myself in the bubble's curve. Funhouse tall. Behind my reflection, the feed the office sees. 2 bodies under the dome. Timestamp gnawing the corner. Framing low because Maritza knocked the bracket last winter. 2 Dantes. 1 white-knuckled on a badge. 1 head down, brim crooked, hands empty like he'd given himself already. Point taken, I told the camera, and whoever keeps a ledger. Hot oil and brake dust drifted out of maintenance. Iron on the tongue. The wash hissed a rinse and a muscle of steam rolled out, beating on my lashes and burning cold. By the time my eyes cleared, the other me stood at the nose of 00. It's nothing to look at if you don't know where to look. The number lives on a little etched placard by the left headlight. Every coach has one, so yard guys can call a machine by more than color. 00 sat quiet as a bank after close. Frost lined the gaskets. Wipers lifted like surrendered arms. He reached for the handle. No power. No vacuum. It opened anyway, gasket sighing. A rope of cold rolled out and caught the light. He didn't look back. Men like us don't when we're doing something dumb and necessary. He stepped inside, his brim cut under the yellow, and vanished. Above me the yard light did its 5-3 again. 1 2 3 4 5. Pause 1 2 3. And I felt the pattern hum in cartilage. The radio popped a clean little fragment through plastic. Operator located. A buzz like a refrigerator deciding to die. Proceed to Riverline. My fingers were still welded to the time clock. I peeled them off one by one. The skin showed white where it had been pinched. I wiped the damp from my lashes. My glove came away dry. Steam slid back across the lanes like a curtain, and beyond it, the bus door drew itself shut with a long whisper. I should have stayed under the dome, let the light tap coat into bone, let the decision decide. I stepped off the paint anyway. Heel skated, hips remembered how not to fall. I crossed the empty lane, the wind shouldered me like a friend giving bad advice. Dante, I said out loud, like calling a dog. It went nowhere. But it was the right name. Down in the wash, something stirred alive without schedule. Brushes unspooled inside. 000 kept its mouth shut, inside dark. Alt me hat wrong, gate mine, move toward the seat. You know when someone sits on your bed in the dark? The way you feel the weight before the springs complain? That. The radio crackled again. This time it talked around me. Special service, block 019R. The numbers were clean. The R sounded drowned. Complete pickups. Cold bit the hinge of my jaw. A tooth chimed. The card said I'd already done all it would let me do. The rest, the reflection turning record into contract, was coming. First came the dirty proof that the system can print another me, and he was already reaching. He set his hands at 10 and 2. He looked at nothing. He waited for exactly the paperwork the city believes in. Wind braided oil, water, cold, and a penny taste into one rope and pulled all 3 of us the same way. Toward the bus. I didn't clock the decision. My feet were already sliding across the paint like the yard had tilted, and I was the loose part. 000 had taken him. The door had said yes with that polite gasket hiss. I couldn't follow him inside yet. The red LED over the dome made a small law of not yet. Another rule rose in my head and tapped the glass. Reflection. Any bus with its power down is mostly mirror. The glass double stacks the night. The windshield throws the yard back at itself until the copy looks truer than the concrete under your boots. I caught my face in 431. The coach parked nose to nose with 000, and my stomach did that small elevator drop you can't blame on anything but physics. Sodium made me long and tired. The wiper twitched once. Not wind. Impulse. Nope, I told the yard. I tore a roll of black poly tarp from the crate by the wash, heavy municipal plastic that always smells like factory and dust. It stuck to my glove and left a black shine on my palm. I climbed 431 without letting the windshield find my eyes, boots feeling for the ribbed step, hand on rail so cold the skin thought about staying. I flung the tarp high so it slumped over the mirror and the header camera bubble. It adhered with a wet bag sound. The light went one shade flatter. Sound dulled a notch. Blue tape screamed off the roll. I pinned corners because I didn't want gravity or anything else changing its mind. Under the plastic, a slow push pressed and eased, as if the space behind the glass had a tide. "I'm not looking," I said. Hearing it out loud made my voice small. Down by my knee, something woke that shouldn't have power on a dark bus. The little thermal printer maintenance uses for inspection slips rattled itself warm. Hot ink smell, thin motor whine. Paper crept from the slot in a bright curl against dead gray plastics. "No," I said, and took it anyway. Dots painted words in rows, patient as a stamp machine. Block 019R. Head special, Riverline's D. Start, complete pickups. Heat from the slip soaked my palm. The ink looked wet and wouldn't smear. Under the tarp, that slow pressure touched the plastic once, then withdrew. I stood there and counted a minute by the hinge of my jaw. At 42, a small skitter crossed the top rib like a roach. At 50, the wiper lifted a fraction and kissed back down. At 60, I peeled tape. Obedience under fear is still obedience. The world snapped back to sodium and edges. The tarp sagged in my hands. The mirror showed me looking like I didn't sleep enough to be this awake. In the reflected glass of 000, a shape occupied the operator's seat. The angle and stillness of my posture when I settle a coach. He adjusted the mirror an eighth of an inch. For half a second, the curve made my face look like a stranger. It slid. The moment ended. The feeling of a signature did not. I set the slip on the dash and set it where I'd hear it and believe it. The yard's 5-3 scan makes a record. The mirror turns it into a driver. The red LED in 431's header held steady, like a decision acknowledged. The printer pushed again, needy little motor, thin complaint. I tore the alt paddle off clean. The paper's rip sounded too close to skin. I looked at the bubble one more beat. "You'll need more than a camera to sign me," I said with all the leverage of a man under a rule. Metal ticked under my boots as leftover heat left the coach. The tarp crackled as it settled. I stepped down onto concrete like stepping off a ledge and didn't slip. The lanes felt longer. Distance dilated between steel. Through layered glass I could see the other me fit himself to 000's seat. My shoulders, my wrong brim. He had the patience I use when a rider insists the map is wrong. The dispatch radio on the wall inside the office groaned. Operator confirmed, block 019R printing. A pause with river sound under it. Proceed to first time point. I ripped the alt paddle into quarters before my brain filed a memo. Thermal paper tore with a long, dry nerve sound. The pieces dropped into the dash trash bag like parts of a bird. "Yeah?" I told 000's black panel. "We'll see." I needed walls and paper older than me to prove this wasn't the first time. The wash rack breathed a chlorine-laced exhale as I passed. A hose dripped on a perfect rhythm, and my bad brain made it into a countdown. In the office, the heater found second gear and rattled its cage. Municipal smells stacked, burned coffee, mop bucket, dust that's lived in ductwork for 20 years. I dropped the tarp on a chair. It sighed like weight finding a home. The quartered paddle looked too clean in the trash. The metal file cabinet that never locks gave up its swell of paper rot and toner dust. I found the tab I already knew would be there, because cities are predictable when they're ashamed. Riverline, 1980. 2011. Grayscale bridge photo, 206 circled 3 times in a starter's angry hand. 12 names, then a small box, 2 unconfirmed missing. A CAD sheet where 206 was dashed out. An internal memo in obedient English. To reduce liability and maintain continuity, CAD will auto-complete unclosed trips on retired blocks using nearest qualified operator of record. No action required from field staff. Patch effective immediately. Someone had underlined liability until the paper bruised and written, "We pay with people." Email printouts fossilize the argument. Dispatch begging for rollback. IT citing discoverable. Legal smoothing continuity of service. One line box twice. CAD will assign nearest carrier of record when trip lacks assigned. Carrier of record, the person the system decides owns a ride. Genfare Bulletin next, Series 5, Record Normalization, Code 186 Unclosed tab. In red pen, if 186 plus no assigned operator, assign carrier of record from nearest badge under dome. Under it, if 2 ins in 1 minute, duplicate flagged. A second arrow, flag duplicate, treat as operator, if reflection confirmed. The tarp's pressure touched my memory again. A map followed. Coffee-stained city grid with X's at the hospital, the shelter, the memorial fence. Notes. Ghost PU, farebox spits transfers, no date. At the east fence, don't move flowers. By the cemetery, bus kneels 206. Clip to card, a Polaroid of this yard at night. A silver Sharpie ring around 000's windshield. Don't stand in this reflection after 0200 in block letters shivering where the ink bled. The phrase in my mouth tasted like chalk and copper. I pressed the rule card's laminate edge into my back until it bit. Scan equals record, I said softly. Reflection equals contract. I put the map back, slid the folder home, shut the cabinet. The sound was a cheap coffin thud. Through the office window, the lanes lay in their sick yellow. 000's glass did that tiny bow it does when a driver leans forward and then pulls away. For a beat, the wipers lifted a fraction and settled. I turned the lamp off to stop making the room hospitable. The yard made itself large again. The wash rack breathed, patient as a throat. The radio warmed another degree. The printer on the maintenance shelf rattled, eager to be useful to something it didn't understand. You wanted a signature, I told the heater, the files, the camera, the wash. You almost got mine. Not yet, not like that. I opened the door and the cold put its hands on my chest. River on the wind, limestone and iron. The yard light held, the dome clicked, and somewhere under all of it, the pump that remembers 206 took a breath it would spend later. The office breathed its old breath. Paper, burned coffee, mop water. The heater found a steady gear and held it, rattling like sheet metal on a highway. My fingers were clumsy from cold and adrenaline. The cabinet I've never had a key for opened on habit and rust. The smell inside was older than policy. Toner dust, manila glue, paper rot with a sweet edge. A silverfish flashed and was gone. I clicked the green-shaded desk lamp. Its puddle of light turned the blotter swamp-colored and pushed the corners of the room back. Folders shouldered each other on the shelf. Fatal, Bridge, Genfare, Series 5, CAD patches, Union, Edu Local 119 Insurance. Paper weight bowed the metal. It's funny how heavy for the record gets. I pulled Riverline, 2011 again, slower this time, like opening a book in church. Grayscale photo, east span sagged into black water. 2:06 a.m., circled 3 times in a starter's impatient hand. 12 names down the side in a font that never gets a day off. A little box, 2 unconfirmed missing. Under it, a CAD timepoint print for block 019R. 206 replaced by a neat run of dashes. No bus. The next sheet, a memo on city letterhead with the goofy river swoosh they stopped using, balanced its own tone between apology and threat. To reduce liability and maintain continuity, CAD AVL will auto-complete unclosed trips on retired blocks using nearest qualified operator of record. No action required from field staff. Patch effective immediately. Somebody had underlined liability hard enough to bruise the paper and added in the margin, "We pay with people." A fossilized email thread followed. Dispatch begging IT for a rollback. IT saying we can't, changes would be discoverable. Legal CC'd with mitigate exposure and preserve continuity. A single line box twice. CAD will assign nearest carrier of record when triple-X assigned. I made myself say it in my head the way legal would. Carrier of record equals the person the system decides owns a ride. Next, Genfare Bulletin, the gray photocopy kind. Series 5, Record Normalization, Code 186 Unclosed Tab. In ancient red pen, if 186 no assigned operator, assign carrier of record from nearest badge under dome. Beneath it, if 2 ins in the same minute, duplicate flagged. A second arrow, flag duplicate, treat as operator if reflection confirmed. / phrasing sat exactly where the tarp's slow push had pressed against my palm. Deeper a map, paper city grid, coffee halos, grease pencil circles at the hospital, the shelter on Knoll, the memorial fence. Notes in 3 inks, ghost PU. Farebox Spitz transfer, no date. By the east fence, don't move flowers. Out by Ridge Cemetery, bus, Niels 206. Clip to cardstock, the Union Flyer, ATU Local 119, out of service, isn't out of life. A paragraph about honoring riders and operators. Across the bottom, a starter's blunt scrawl. They didn't go out, they got logged. Behind that, taped square to backing board, a Polaroid of this yard at night, sodium orange. Buses aimed at the fence, 000 circled in silver marker, and under it, block letters wobbled where the ink bled. Do not stand in this reflection after 0200. My tongue found copper without permission. I pressed the rule card's laminate edge into the soft above my hip until it left teeth. I kept digging. A thinner folder, recent print stock, labeled in a tidy hand, confluence events frequency, stapled grid, rainfall totals, dates, surge in 3 markers. A memo with no logo, just a typed line and a stamp. During underground flood conditions, spiritual density, Sooth. TPA on standby, rule card distribution mandatory for night staff. Someone sketched the storm tunnels into the river delta like veins on a hand. 206 sat in the crook of a line like a bruise. The heater knocked once and settled. Dust motes boiled in the lamp like plankton. The radio on the sill warmed a notch. The smell that comes off old speakers, Band-Aid and penny, salted the back of my tongue. On the corkboard, half hidden under a detour notice, an interdept memo stamped received 2012, Feb 07. Public Works, Transit. Please ensure memorial access remains at the east fence during bridge remediation. Do not remove or relocate flowers. The site maintains its own balance. Somebody had drawn a line from that clause to a separate sheet on farebox reconciliation and circled balance on both. I let out a breath I hadn't meant to hold. Balance, I said to paper. It didn't argue. The wall clock was 2 minutes wrong the way it always is. My watch said 1:39, close enough to the number the whole building remembered. I put the map and memos back in their layer of silt, slid the folder home, shut the cabinet. The door thudded like cheap coffin wood. I killed the lamp. The room got bigger and uglier in sodium. Through double glass, I could see 000's windshield do that tiny bow a bus does when a driver leans forward to set hand to wheel, then goes still. For a half beat, the wipers flexed and laid back down. I said it again, low enough to keep it mine. Scan makes the record. Reflection signs the driver. The wash rack inhaled behind the bay, humid chlorine, like a throat getting ready. A hose dripped at a perfect interval, and my dumb brain counted down because that's one of the things it knows how to do. You wanted paperwork. I told the files, the heater, the camera, the wash. You almost got my signature. Not yet, not like that. I opened the office door. Cold put its hand flat on my chest. Limestone and iron came off the wind from a river miles away. The yard light held steady. The dome clicked its patient metronome. Somewhere under the concrete, a pump remembered 206 and took its next breath. I didn't wait for the kneel. The yard had that held breath tension and I stepped into it. Wind skimmed the lanes low and mean. Sodium through the world in bruise yellow. The dome clicked once, patient, and 000 crouched like it already knew my name. I cut across the paint in short ice steps. The door decided to open for me. No compressor, just rubber parting. Air rolled out. Wet limestone, iron, the paper mold smell the river leaves behind in municipal buildings. Shin? My hat brim wrong, my shoulders right, sat with hands at 10 and 2. He didn't look. He didn't have to. When his sleeve brushed mine, it felt like wash spray without water. He slid past and was gone into the aisle, a subtraction more than a man. I took the seat because there was nothing else to take. Old foam under the cushion met my thighs like it had my measurements. The wheel was colder than it had any right to be. Gauges lifted from dead to ready without tea or chime. Needles rose like tide. An amber square where no MDT should be came up vague as an aquarium. The head sign stayed black. I put my thumb on the needle. Muscle memory, ritual, consent, pick one. The front dropped 2 inches with that tired blood pressure hiss. The windshield tilted a degree and threw the yard back at me. The radio nowhere in this bus woke anyway. Plastic warmed. That Band-Aid, copper smell salted the back of my tongue. A voice rode up on the carrier, consonants softened by distance or water. Operator, special service. Proceed to Riverline. I set my foot on the brake and eased the shifter. The detent gave like it had waited for me. 000 settled around my weight with petty pride. I said it out loud, so the ledger would have to log it. Not to finish pickups, to drown your open trip the way the river drowned the span. The wash rack waited 10 yards ahead, ribs steaming, tracks wet and green. Pumps ticked behind the wall, counting time. I fed the brake. The coach rolled with that low, patient torque only a bus with air can make. The first brush kissed the glass. Bristle whispered grit. Then water, flat and cold, slapped the pane and pushed me back into the seat on reflex. Chlorine and iron rode the spray. It hunted the tired seams around the gasket. The steering had the slack I know and like. I kept it steady and let the structure do the talking. Pumps droning down a note, belts catching, brush arms bowing in, the cabin a drum. The mirror blurred into a wrong oval. My breath fogged and wiped itself in a rhythm I couldn't keep. The dead head sign twitched, letters tried to build themselves, failed, then held a second. Special. Water hit harder. The panel went black. There's a drain slot just before the rack mouth. If you hit it at exactly the wrong speed, you get a clean fake pothole. I aimed and took it. The coach dipped. The number 206 lifted in my bones, not on a clock. Write it, I told the system. Write this instead. The brush arms crossed and pressed. Wipers flexed off the glass and snapped back. The snap went up my jaw and into a molar like static. The cluster's amber square deepened. One word painted itself into the spray from behind, light catching droplets from the inside out. Riverline. Water found a cold thread at my knee through the gasket. It crawled up my thigh like a warning. I hit the kneel again. The nose ducked. The ducted sheet shoved the lower edge of the pane and whistled. The floor under us floated a fraction, that black ice moment when friction becomes rumor. The rack tracks kept us straight. I pressed the pedal, not to go faster, just to commit. The head sign built itself again, stubborn. Special. Riverline. Roster cleared. Cleared sat wrong. Closed is when a human clocks out. Cleared is what a system does to make a column look tidy. The final sweep bar came across hard. Bristles squealed. A relay that doesn't live in any bus I've driven thunked somewhere behind the dash. A coil of air ran cold over my ankles like a door had opened into a night that isn't on a map. Take me how I say, I told the ledger. Not how you print. The wash answered with more water. I drove the rest of the way in. The rack took me like a throat finishing a swallow. Brush arms crossed and held. The floor under the wheels shivered on its rubber mats. Ribs in the concrete carried the vibration up through the column and into my elbows. Pumps behind the wall dropped half a step in pitch, then pushed again, laboring, steady, municipal. Water sheeted, cleared, sheeted. Each pass reset the world to white noise and motion blur. The head sign twitched and built itself one brick at a time through the spray. Special. Riverline. Then a third line crawled in, letters stuttering as the pump cycled. Operator needed. The words didn't float in my head, they lived on plastic above my face, pale and stubborn. I kept my eyes high on the glass because mirrors make contracts here and I wasn't signing. Sun visor down, sightline cut. Left mirror already a vibrating oval of gray. Right mirror a smear. I slid my palm along the inside of the windshield and left a clean, greasy handprint across the sweet spot where a face would find itself. Soap scummed the edges, the line crawled a bubble and broke. The kneel held. I tickled the pedal just enough to keep the rollers honest. Wipers worked in a losing rhythm. Lift, slam, chatter. Lift, slam, chatter. One blade hopped as bristle crossed it. The hop thumped into my molar like a finger on a tooth. The system tried new angles. The blank square where MDT would be, if this had ever been a coach, drew one word again from behind the wash of light. Riverline. A thermal head I couldn't see spun somewhere and failed. The smell reached me, burned sugar, cheap glue, washed thin by chlorine and cold. I aimed for the drain slot again on the way out cycle. The front axle kissed it clean and the bus tipped a degree that only drivers care about. The pump groaned and the water fan widened, then narrowed like somebody riding a dimmer. The panel above me flickered back. Roster cleared. No, I said into the hiss, steady as a pre-trip. Not cleared. Drowned. I popped the kneel once more. The nose ducked. A seam whistled. A ribbon of cold found my knee. I reached under the dash where the service door isolation lives on these older girls and slapped it shut. If nothing else, it kept one more circuit from deciding it owned me. The rack went to rinse. The water lost its teeth and sharpened its volume. The brushes backed off with a rubber squeal and swung home, dripping. The pump took a breath and ran a long, descending sigh, a belt slipping and catching until it found stillness. Foam collapsed in the gutter. The spray thinned to threads. The bus rose a shade as the airbags refilled. The smell shifted from bright chlorine to wet iron and warm hose. The head sign held its last demand, dimmer now, as if written on the back of my eyelid. Operator needed. I let my hands rest at 10 and 2 and didn't move. The steering wheel had warmed enough to stop biting. Water tracked in thin V's down the glass and pooled at the gasket corners where every coach in this yard tries to hide its age. I counted the pump's cooldown clicks. 4. Pause. 2. Long pause. 1. Done. I eased the coach forward, the 3 feet the rack allows, and stopped on the floor grates. Bristle strings shook themselves empty behind me. The rollers thumped to neutral. Somewhere a solenoid snapped back into good behavior. The rack lights went from work bright to idle. Shh, still no mirrors. Still visor down. I reached into the bin where drivers leave their trash and found a rag that had lived 1,000 winters. I dragged it in a lazy S across the inside of the windshield and watched the smear turn the world to matte. Any face that tried to form there would have to fight for it. 1 breath. 2. The radio that doesn't belong in this bus dragged itself through a carrier wave and let a word escape like air from a tire. Proceed. Water noise filled the gap. Complete pickups. I already did, I said. I completed yours. I brought 000 out of the rack slow like backing a boat off a ramp. The tires rolled over wet steel and then found the bite of asphalt. The lane out front wore a fresh shine and a line of slush that would freeze crooked if the wind wanted it. Sodium turned each puddle into a coin. The wash steam blew sideways and made a curtain for nobody. I kept the visor down and my eyes on the lane stripe. The dome above the rack apron showed a steady red. No 5-3. The only code left in the yard was cold. Past the mouth, I set the brake and let the seat give me back an inch of height. The head sign finally dimmed and bled down to blank. The last letters went like embers. The little amber square in the cluster sank to dead gray. The gauges stayed where they ought to on a bus that doesn't exist. Somewhere in the dash a relay that never was clicked off, like it had an appointment to make. I let the silence roll over the coach in layers. Water ticking down off ribs, pump room settling back into concrete, heater in the office cycling up and down 2 bays away. A distant animal, the kind of quiet that draws a straight line across a page and asks you to write on it. One thought tried to float, slick and round, recycled. I let it touch and sink. Not tonight. I stood. The cushion let my thighs go with a slow peel. My knees didn't like it, and told me so. The air in the aisle had the standing swamp chill of a locker room. I pulled the sun visor halfway back so I wouldn't brain myself, kept it low enough to keep my face out of the glass. Step 1. Step 2. The tread ribs gripped like they meant it. The door gave up a last bead of water and dropped it onto the rubber with a slap. Outside, the yard had moved a fraction toward morning. Not light. Just the color of possible light washing the brick, the kind that makes men lie to themselves about how warm it's about to get. The memorial at the fence hunched under plastic and ribbon. Drops collected at the low points and fell into the salt there with tiny white bites. I walked the curbside to the rear and popped the hinged panel with my knuckles. The latch stuck for a half second, flash of skin catch, and then gave. Batteries. Cable. The knife switch red and calm. My hand settled on it like it always has after a long night. The card in my pocket said one thing. The night said the same thing in a different accent. Off, I told the bus, the ledger in its ribs, the river with its neat handwriting. We're done. I threw the handle. Chunk. Real machinery doing a real thing. Relays cascaded forward. Tick, tick, tock. Air bled somewhere with a sigh that had nothing to do with pressure. The cabin darkened that last shade machines do when they're honestly dead. I shut the panel and didn't bother to latch it. The cold made my fingers slow and stubborn. The visor still hung inside like a cheap helmet. Across the lane, 432 sat where I'd left it earlier in the night. The receipt I'd taped there was still center pane, now cold and curled at 2 corners where the blue tape had lifted a fingernail. The door I'd left gapped knew its manners again. Pulled to, not latched, the little rubber lip kissing metal. The yard had tidied what it could. I stood there and let the wet wind do what it does, pushing diesel low over concrete, bringing the faint bleach from the rack and the iron from somewhere under the fence. My jaw unclenched by a millimeter. The dome's red stayed steady. The light on the high pole held no code, just illumination. The rack coughed once as a pump purged itself and then fell quiet for good. The thin water along the drain slot found its pace. Tap, tap, tap. The sound carried into the office like a clock that believes in itself. I went that way. The door took my shoulder and gave me the rubber kiss in return. The heater met me at the threshold with dry air and dust. No speeches waited. No vision. Just a room that looked like morning had to start in it, or it never would. Behind the glass, the lanes wore their tired geometry. 000 sat with its wipers lifted a fraction, like a man raising his eyebrows and deciding not to ask. The visor showed in the windshield as a black bar. No reflection stared back. Good. The printer on the desk coughed awake without waiting for me. A single line burned across a stub of thermal with that hot ink smell that always finds the back of your tongue. Roster, open trip, cleared by starter action. No signature line. No name, just the kind of sentence a city uses when it wants a day to balance. Fine, I said. My voice sounded like it had learned to live in here. Out in the yard, wind ran a hand over the plastic at the fence and made it snap once, soft. The dome's red stayed steady. The highlight didn't blink a pattern. The world held a minute, flat as a ledger line. I let it. Morning came sideways, more temperature than light. Sodium residue rinsed thin through dirty plexi, laying a skim of color over steel. The rack finished its last breath. Brushes parked. Pump bled down with a long, descending whine. The windshield shed the last of its white noise and gave me back edges. Fence, pole, the memorial bunched under plastic, ribbons gone city gray. The head sign above me was dead slab. When I pried my fingers off the wheel, the skin looked papery, a fine gray crosshatch from cold and grip. In the dash, something that had never been installed clicked off anyway, like a relay keeping its habits. I didn't move. Sitting was a way to keep the story from turning the page. The office radio coughed once, old plastic warming, no voice. Bandage and copper smell leaked into the lanes. I climbed down with my knees first. Cold slid up my pant leg. The yard wore a crust of thin rime on paint lines and black puddles with a fluorescent skin. The air had that municipal blend. Chlorine from the rack, diesel from a coach that will never start and still outgasses every night, stale coffee sneaking out of the propped office door. Inside, the heater had made a dent. The room sat it barely. The door seal gave me its tired rubber kiss, and the room did the meanest thing a room does after a night like that. Acted normal. The computer woke slow. The audit app blinked its termination banner in 2007 font and redrew itself in rectangles. Top line, Unit 432, count status balanced, error code. The line with my name, Morales D, pending passenger, was gone like a rumor that ran out of oxygen. I stared until the pixels swam. Sure, I told the screen. We're tidy now. On the desk, the little maintenance printer, the one that should only spit seat tags, warmed, made its torn fingernail noise, and pushed a single line through the hot head. Burned sugar smell, cheap glue. Then, Number 7, addendum. If 206 passes without operator, starter will be created. Created, I said. The word parked wrong in my mouth and stayed. Glass clicked behind me. Through the office window, the yard sat in bruise yellow. On the inside face of the glass, letters ghosted up like a monitor, pale and official. Starter, Morales D. My reflection lived under the text, double exposure. Promotion and obituary in one plate. The rule card in my pocket pressed the shape of no exceptions into my hip like a stamp. Bootsteps skated the hall. Maritza filled the doorway, that mix of bus soap and cheap shampoo you smell on everyone who works the night. You get any sleep? She asked, not meaning the question. Quiet night, I lied. She squinted out at the fence. From her angle, she couldn't see the starter text. Yellow light painted her jacket the color of old nicotine. She rubbed a coffee stain off a detour notice from ATU Local 119, and a little brown came away. Public Works wants the memorial moved. Bad optics? Don't, I said, a little harder than I meant and exactly right. She nodded like we'd said grace. You need anything? A different job, I said. We left it in the air like a staple. Her steps retreated, the floor's note changing under rubber, greasy tile, soft closet linoleum, bare cement. The outer door flapped, slapped cold back down the hall, and the office shrank a notch. My phone buzzed. That thread-thin vibration belongs to money and family. I looked anyway. HR portal. Your health coverage is active. Effective date, today. Medical, Morales dependent, Rosario Morales. Pressure climbed behind my eyes. If I cried at work, this would be where. I squeezed the phone until the cheap case creaked. Got it, I told the room. You don't kill what you need. You hire it. Outside, a rookie shape moved under the camera dome. Hoodie under uniform jacket, rookie stomp because he hasn't learned where the slick is. Rodriguez, you only get that hopeful posture once. Jay, I said to the glass. It fogged a little and wrote his name back at me. He pulled his badge, looked up into the dome because nobody tells them not to their first week. The red LED inside burned steady. Not 5-3, just steady, system awake, not calling. Don't look at it, I said to nobody he could hear. He tapped the reader anyway. Time clock chirped its polite bip. LCD rolled. Rodriguez 1. A slip curled out in the cold. He didn't look. The wall radio by my elbow woke on a carrier wave and let one word out, damp. Copy, rookie, unreliable. Not for me, always for me. The clock chirped again with no badge present. The sound crawled into my ear and laid an egg. Through the office glass, the audit line blinked yellow without permission. Rodriguez J. Pending passenger. No, I said, and stood so hard the banker's lamp shivered. The rule card says stand under the dome when the yard blinks 5-3. It wasn't blinking. The LED held steady, one more beat of grace than anyone deserves. That's when you move. I took the doors cold in the chest and went. The yard smelled fresh in the lie of morning, wet stone, diesel, a sugar note from abandoned coffee. Rodriguez stood at the end of lane B, looking toward the rack like it owed him a sign. The dome's red stayed steady. The highlight just burned. Jay, I called. The word made 10 feet and fell. He turned, that stupid, hopeful face. Starter said I'm on 15 inbound, he called, voice cracking on inbound. Starter's covered, I said. The sentence found teeth inside me as I said it. Starter's me. He blinked. He hadn't learned yet that the job changes your name without asking. I stepped under the dome. One badge once. The reader beeped soft. Morales D. 602 crawled across the LCD. Paper puffed out. In. The red LED never blinked a pattern. It just watched. Rodriguez lifted his badge by instinct like a Simon Says. Don't, I said, and this time he heard it as an order. His hand stopped. Inside the office, the audit screen, visible at a corner through double glass, updated itself. Rodriguez J. Pending passenger went gray, slid down, cleared. A new line wrote itself at the top, where a night decides what it's gonna be. Morales D. Starter. Temporary. In this city, that word does more work than permanent. I didn't need to go read it. The glass still wore my job in pale letters. The little printer had already spit the law. The phone still showed the green dot that buys forgiveness. I lifted the old dispatch handset. The cord kinked where it always kinks. Plastic warm from the blower, a little greasy from 100 hands. The mouthpiece smelled like old nickel and coffee. Dial tone, thin, municipal, adequate. The PA amp woke with a hum. Air ran in the duct and the heater imitated wind through pines. Rodriguez watched me with his badge half raised and half forgotten. The dome's LED burned steady, metronome to a song I didn't pick. Chlorine and copper lived at the back of my tongue. The card bit my hip one last time. A drip in the rack found the grate and set a clock. I put my voice on the grid and fed the ledger the line it wanted from a person it had already written. Depot 14 acknowledges, I said. Mark Block Deadhead. Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell to join Dr. Noctis. The fear has only just begun.